everyone, and welcome to another episode of the After Aston I podcast. I am really excited to chat to today's guest as we are joined by the fantastic Stephen Billingham. Stephen has spent decades seeing what makes organisations and their boards succeed or fail. So I'm looking forward to learning some stuff. And I've had the pleasure of working with Stephen when he's come in to support our students on team pitch panels before. So it's great to catch up again. Before we get into the episode, though, I just wanted to give the new Aston for Life magazine a little bit of a shout out. It is hot off the press and it has been landing in homes across the globe over the past week or so. There are some amazing stories in there. The physical copy is lovely and has a really nice shiny diamond on the cover to celebrate 60 years of Aston. But if you would rather read the digital version, it's on the Aston for Life platform and we will leave a link to that in the show notes. For now, Geoff, I will hand over to you to introduce Stephen.
Thank you, Amy. Stephen Billingham has spent 7 decades at the highest levels of British business and public service, leading and governing some of the country's most significant organisations. He completed his PhD at Aston in 1987 on managing currency risk on international contracts. Over the years, he served as Group Finance Director at the British Energy Group and W.S. Atkins, Group Treasurer at both Severn Trent and Balfour Beatty, and later as Chairman for a range of companies including Anglian Water, Punch Taverns, and Urenco, one of the world's major nuclear fuel providers. He was also Senior Independent Director and Audit Committee Chair at Balfour Beatty. Outside of business, he was also the Chair of the Royal Berkshire NHS Foundation Trust and has been a councillor in local government. His experience spans sectors from utilities and engineering to healthcare and pubs, and he continues to serve in the charitable sector as a Deputy Chair and Trustee at Leonard Cheshire, one of the UK's leading disability charities. In 2016, he was made an Honorary Doctor of Science, one of 50 Aston graduates recognised for their achievements as part of the university's 50th anniversary celebrations. 3 years later, in 2019, Stephen was appointed a CBE in the Queen's Birthday Honours List for his service to government-owned, public and regulated businesses. Stephen, welcome to the After Aston I podcast.
Well, thank you for inviting me to attend, actually. I appreciate being here.
We've got a very simple, easy way to kick things off, Stephen, which is to ask, what drew you into the world of finance and government in the first place? I know it's a very big question in reality. Was that always the plan? Did your career evolve in unexpected directions? What was your journey there?
Okay, let's put together 2 things. I did my undergraduate degree at Brunel, and I did a degree in government and economics, which sort of sucked me into sort of the sphere of government and things at the edges of government. I then was president of the student union at Brunel for a year and got sucked into financial management because the student union nearly went bust in 1980, a long time ago. All right. And I got involved in turning it around. And I then decided that I wanted a bit more education. I was then sort of hooked on financial issues and came to Aston to do my PhD in, as you said, in managing foreign currency on international contracts, very much financial and accounting based. And I straddled both what was then called the Management Centre, now called the Business School, and the Maths Department to do that PhD. And I sort of carried on from there, really. I've been hooked on financial issues of one form or another during my career.
Amazing. What a story there, Stephen. You have chaired and served on the boards of some major organisations over that time. Geoff was rattling off a few of them in your introduction. What would you say defines a good board?
I think a good board that is one that has good interrelationships between the non-executive directors and the executive directors. It's about trust, it's about openness, it's about the ability to talk about difficult and important issues. And if a board can't do that, if the executives aren't sharing their trials and tribulations and their successes with the board, then the board will not work. The trust will not be there. I've been on boards where the executives have not been trusted by the non-execs, and those boards break down. In the main, what tends to happen is the executives then leave, actually, or get asked to leave because the trust has broken down. So trust, openness, clarity, those that allow proper debate and challenge and support, what makes a very good board.
Are there any kind of warning signs or cultural flags within a board which can warn you that there's going to be trouble ahead if things don't change?
I think the answer is yes. It's when the executives aren't open, actually. It's when the executives start to clam up. That's the real tester point, where they don't want to raise the difficult, tough issues and expose the problems they've got. And if they don't expose the problems, the board can't debate them, they can't find solutions. And you can see it happening. You can see those things rolling towards you. And the executives, I always think, delude themselves. I've been around companies where the executives have deluded themselves about the performance of the business, and the performance of the business has then gone on to fail. I should point out, none of the businesses you've mentioned the names of, I have been involved in other businesses which have failed where I've not been a director. So it's actually, I've just been there to help.
And do you think, you mentioned that kind of delusional quality in some of the bad ones, not the ones we listed at the beginning. Do you think is that sometimes an element of the kind of the personalities involved, or do you think it's a risk that is always possible, that anybody could slip into that?
I think anybody can slip into it, and it depends. And I think then depends on the chairman. And the chairman's role in boards is hugely important, because the relationship they have with the chief executive and the other executive directors matters enormously. And if you have a situation where that relationship breaks down, all right, then you can find the executives not willing to share things, not willing to be clear about the problems they've got. And the onus is on the chair to actually foster that relationship, keep the doors open, make sure the executives are thinking about everything and exposing the issues.
When you've come into Aston and sat with some of our students, so I know you've worked with our MBAs, but also with undergraduate entrepreneurs, have you seen any similarities in the business pitches that they're putting forward and the team dynamics to some of the challenges or opportunities you've seen in the boardroom?
Not really. I mean, because all the people I've seen have been executives. You've not got that relationship between non-executives, people who aren't involved in the day-to-day running the business, and the people who are actually wedded to running it full time. So when I have pitches and I see the MBA students, they are really executives. So you've not seen that dynamic take place. And as businesses mature, when you're in the early days, having non-executive directors probably doesn't matter very much. But as businesses start to mature and they start to be faced with a multiplicity of issues, then having people who are not involved in the day-to-day, who can give you that distant perspective, who come in and see things in a way that somebody who's actually there, head down, really grinding through the issues, can't see. And that's why, I never really appreciated it, I have to say, when I was younger, that dynamic between non-executives and executive directors, and it matters enormously. If you can get it to work properly, it means that businesses function properly. And corporate governance, if you'd asked me 35 years ago about corporate governance and things, I said, no, this stuff matters, but my life, it does matter. All right. And it matters in terms of actually creating stability and allowing business to perform well. All right. If you get the right board.
You mentioned the kind of the length of career there, and changing times inevitably are part of that. These days, boards are often expected to think about a lot more than profits. Maybe that's always been the case. Things like sustainability, ethics, social responsibility all seem to be much more part of the picture. Has that been something that's evolved over the time, or has it always been there and maybe hasn't always been highlighted?
I think a lot of those in good companies, I think all those issues have always been there. The requirement that companies now have to report on issues and disclose in public actually what they're doing, I think has meant that the discussion at board meetings has changed to focus more on those things. And I think that it created more emphasis. Sometimes it goes a bit too far, I think, actually. At the end of the day, businesses that make money deliver socially as well, actually. I think the important thing is to make sure they deliver socially in the right sort of way. What you don't want to be is hell-bent on making profits. All right, but businesses are about making profits. They're about delivering value to the community as a whole. They're about creating jobs. And so they're about longevity, which is all about sustainability, actually. Because what you don't want is a business that actually corrupts itself by doing bad things. So I think good businesses have always dealt with those issues. It's just now they're in the public domain and you need to report on them. Therefore, there's more discussion about them in an open sense at board meetings. All right? And that's no bad thing. That is no bad thing at all. That's definitely a good thing. All right? But companies shouldn't get overwhelmed by those things. At the end of the day, if you don't make money, the business won't survive.
We have that debate quite a lot with some of our students. What is the purpose of business? And that question of profit or not for profit. Well, actually, a not for profit has to make money anyway to keep going. But what is the purpose of a business? Is it to support the environment? Is it to support society? Or, as you say, that very basic level, by existing, it's putting money back into society, economy, and so on. And then what can it do on top of that? It's a really interesting debate.
It's a very interesting debate. It's a very interesting where the balance sits, actually. And I think it's a balance around all these things as to what extent you worry about long-term sustainability. As I say, if you don't make money, you won't be there to talk about it, all right? But you don't want to do dirty things. So businesses don't want to do dangerous things. I've never wanted to be involved in businesses that do what I call dirty things. I always want to be involved in big things that are good. Good is employing people, giving people good jobs, good education, development. It's about sustainability. It's about not doing things to corrupt the planet, trying to do all you can to deliver things cleanly and efficiently. And a good business that's making good money will do all those things. And worrying about the wider purpose. Why are we here? What are we actually about doing? All right. And at the end of the day, if you're making money, you're probably doing something useful. All right. It's those businesses that stop making money. Time expired. Nobody's involved in the UK in coal mining because it's a dirty business, risky business, environmentally aggressive business. It doesn't make any money. Hasn't made money for a long time, and therefore it's out. Doesn't exist really in the UK. It's a serious business now.
It sounds very much as if also there's that element of the decisions that are taken, the kind of conscious decisions to what type of business to be or how to approach a problem that's come up. That are obviously, in the larger the business, potentially the larger their impact. Can you give any examples of some really tough decisions that you've had to be part of in your career and what you took away from the experience of having to make those kinds of decisions?
I think the toughest things I was involved in when I was working, British Energy ran the nuclear fleet in the UK, around the nuclear power, nearly all the nuclear power stations in the UK, generating 20% of the UK's power. So very important. And we were debating our future as to how we continued with the business to allow the UK to have that carbon-free, sustainable energy. And the business wasn't really big enough to generate enough cash to allow us to build new nuclear power stations, is the simple answer. So the question is, what do we do with ourselves? And the answer was, at some point, you need to sell yourselves. We got ourselves in a process where we got caught between the aspirations of the shareholders in terms of value, the aspirations of the French and the British government in terms of strategy, right, and actually how you deliver that. And we had some very difficult and tortuous discussions about actually how you deliver that. I always thought delivering British Energy into a safe place. Ultimately, we sold the business to EDF. All right, it's now part of the EDF nuclear fleet. It's allowed the development of Hinkley Point. It's allowed the development of Sizewell, which in the last week or so has just announced its financial close. It's allowed the nuclear business in the UK to continue and develop to give sustainable energy to the UK. But back in 2009, when we were doing the deal, very difficult. And we ended up on the top of the news one day, actually, when the deal fell apart. Then we reinstigated it and we did the deal in the end. All right. But very interesting, tough discussions, actually, around the board table, classic late at night stuff. These aren't rather interesting. These decisions end up being made late at night because the debates go on. And a board that's willing to give time and effort and consideration to issues, things go on. You might make a decision by 5 o'clock, but you'll make it at some point. And if it's 11 o'clock at night, it's 11 o'clock at night before you make the decisions.
Did you take anything in particular away from that?
I took away from that you need to have full discussions. I mean, you've got tough issues. You need to have a full range of discussions, well advised. So in those situations, we had PR consultants in the board meeting. We had our financial advisors in the board meeting. We had our lawyers in the meeting and our brokers in the meeting, because there are a number of different facets to all of that. And you need to make sure that the board is well informed at times like that across the panoply of issues, that you don't trip over something. All right, you're not making incomplete decisions, and that means that the dialogue can be long and extensive. All right? And also, I think the ability of the chair to actually make those debates orderly and get to a rational decision, having all the information on the table, is crucially important. And I've learned from that. And therefore, my view on being a chair has always been, what the chair's role is about exposing issues. It's about exposing issues and allowing a board to consider all the things it needs to consider, debating them, coming to a conclusion, making a decision, and then moving on.
And you mentioned earlier, Stephen, about that role of the chair and how significant it is in the process. I was recently at a conference where there was some research being shared about what stage organizations start to put governance structures in place, and startups that perhaps don't think about it straight away. And then they suddenly realize as they've developed and grown that they should have had these structures in the first place. What would be your thoughts about when does governance come in and at what scale?
You can bring in governance, I think, in stages, and you can do it lightly to start off with, right? And then you need to scale it up. If you're in the public markets, if you start, you've got to have good governance. There's no way around it. If you're in a situation where you have major league shareholders, a number of shareholders, I think it's when you start to have a number of shareholders, it starts to matter, because you have different perspectives on things. And therefore, the governance and the ability to make decisions in an orderly and comprehensive manner. What's governance about? Governance is actually about making decisions that you can support, and it's about actually ensuring the information's been before people to make those decisions. So there's not irrationality about what goes on. There's rationality that you can represent to third parties. So it's really when you start to get involved with more and more third parties, whether it be investors or lenders, or joint venture partners, or even a supply chain, actually, even a complex supply chain where people's lives are depending on you buying their products, then I think good governance, good decision making matters at that point.
Without obviously asking you to name any names, have you ever sat in on any kind of board where there's been one person around the table who maybe it's a personal disagreement, maybe it's something about them, you just don't like the individual, and that has not necessarily caused any issues, but you've had to kind of view things from a different angle because of it? Do you get those kind of personality clashes, or do ultimately people put things aside, or does it go back to that good and bad board thing again?
You do get personality clashes. You do get difficult non-executive directors. You get non-executive directors who have their own agenda. I've seen it all at different times. There are people who have agendas beyond perhaps the company. They just worry about their own shareholders' perspective, or they worry about a particular issue that they're concerned about. You do get that, and you get people who don't like each other, like in any aspect of the world. And what happens there? I mean, sometimes you can talk those issues through, and you can come to conclusions. Sometimes you have to get to a point where you have to say to non-executive directors or even executive directors, perhaps now the time is for you to do something else. It's not working here. But you have to be also being very careful that sometimes, particularly non-executives, have to be prickly sometimes. They have to actually be difficult. I've sat on boards where I've reflected on it, and I've thought certain non-executive directors just annoyed me. They've just really, as I sat there in executive, and they've annoyed me. And I thought, and in retrospect, I thought they may have annoyed me, but do you know what? Their points were good. They forced us to do things and think about things that we perhaps didn't want to think about, that we did. So there's an interesting balance about this. You don't have to like everyone on the board, but you have to make sure they're making a contribution that doesn't create too much rancor. But you can also have situations where boards are really quite explosive. And I've been in explosive board meetings. I've been in board meetings where directors have walked out. And that's tough, right? But you have to reflect on, why did that happen? I've been in situations where one board meeting once where we had to split the directors into two groups, actually, and I've been in different rooms. I was walking between the two of them. So different things happen, and you can sometimes get through those things, and you can the chair can act as a mediator. Sometimes the differences are too big, and you have to ask people to pursue other interests.
And just thinking about that role of a chair as mediator, but also you've talked about the vision, trying to keep the team together, trying to make sure there's a direction of travel. Yeah. If some of our listeners are at the point now where they are trying to put in place those governance structures, where they're going out to market to look for a chair, a non-exec chair, what should they be looking for in the person they're going to bring into that role?
Well, number one, I think they need to have somebody who understands their business. I mean, I think you need to walk in. If you're if you're in the early stages of setting up governance, and this also applies to later stages actually, because I always think that if you don't understand the business, if you can't get your head around it, or somebody can't get their head around it quickly, they're not the right person. You may get on with them, you may like them, but that's not the answer. The answer is they need to be somebody who can work with the executives, understand what the executives are trying to do, challenge it, push back a bit, trying to make sure they make decisions in an orderly fashion. But if you don't actually understand it, then you're lost. And I've seen non-execs on boards who really do not understand what the business is about, right? And they're just, counterproductive. And I think, and the same thing applies to if you're trying to set governance up from scratch. You want people who are tuned in to you. Then they're not people who are going to say yes to you on everything, but there are people who are tuned into what you're trying to do and understand the parameters of what they're trying to do, and therefore can add value in that concept.
So that when they challenge as part of their role, when they play devil's advocate or ask the difficult questions, they're doing it from a point of knowledge rather than a point of complete ignorance.
Yes, no, indeed. Yeah, indeed. And it doesn't have to be complete knowledge, and it won't be, because in the main, if you're coming in as chair, the executives know more about the business than you will ever know. All right. But you've got to be on the same territory. You'll be speaking the same language and understand the same dynamics of what's going on in that business to be able to challenge it. So otherwise you're just missing the point a lot of the time.
And you're currently a trustee at a charity, Leonard Cheshire.
Yeah.
How does serving on a charity board differ from the experiences in the corporate world?
That's an interesting question, because Leonard Cheshire is an interesting charity because it doesn't do a lot of fundraising. Some fundraising, but it's predominantly providing services to local authorities and the health service. Much like a business, it operates very much like a corporation does. And we worry about profitability, because profitability is about sustainability, about staying in existence, right? I think the difference is that you have a different group of people on the board, actually, just a different, wider spectrum of people who are interested in what the charity does. And therefore, you haven't got the same sort of commercial boundaries perhaps you have on a commercial board where you want people who understand the territory. You've got people with a wider experience of social care in the widest context, and some people involved in not-for-profit organisations, right? Once again, different perspective on it. And so you've got a wider group of people, I think, actually. I think the dialogue is much the same. The Cheshire Board is excellent. The people on it are first class. We have very good discussions about very important issues. I just think people come from a slightly wider perspective on it. That's all, and which I think makes good. And we have a very good chairman. I'm not chairman, but we have a very good chairman. It makes bringing things to a conclusion that much tougher, I think, actually, on the chair, actually. All right, who needs to think about how you marshal all those different views into common ground to make the right decisions for the charity.
Sounds absolutely fascinating, Stephen. Thank you for that. Thinking about those who are perhaps earlier in their career, what advice would you give them if they are aspiring to have a board position in the future?
What I say to everybody is I would say, when you're younger, you've got two things you can chase. You can either chase money or you can chase an opportunity. And what I always say to everybody, chase the opportunity. In fact, and the money will follow, all right? And if the money doesn't follow, you'll probably end up in a very interesting place anyway, all right? So always chase the opportunity. And I think if you chase the opportunity, you will find yourself doing interesting things. You'll perform at your best if you're doing interesting things that you like to do. And coming and ending up on a board somewhere is a natural thing that will happen. You can't force it, all right? Because you're dependent on your peers around you and people who are more senior than you making decisions about whether you're the right person to be on a board. And the way you'll be the right person is by performing well in things you like doing and show that you like doing it. So, as I chase the opportunity, not the money, is what I say to everybody. If they I need a bit more money. No, you don't. Chase the opportunity. That's what I say. And I think, and that's worked well for me, because I've always looked at interesting things. I've always thought about what is the next interesting thing I should do. And sometimes you also have to take risks, actually, the other thing. Sometimes you always have to take a bit of a punt on things that it's going to work. And sometimes it doesn't. Bits of my career have not worked. I've made mistakes. I've gone to places to do jobs that didn't work out. They weren't what I expected them to be. But in retrospect, you know what? It needed to happen. All right? It did me no harm. And I learned from it. So people should be afraid to take chances in their careers.
Stephen, this has been absolutely fascinating. Before we let you go, we always wrap up by asking our guests the same two quick fire questions. So, if you could have anyone in the world, dead or alive, historical figures, celebrities, anyone at all on your team, let's say you're putting together the dream board, the dream non-exec directors, who would you want?
That's a very tough question, actually. Can I answer it not with a name, but a characteristic? And a characteristic is, I want people with a degrees in clarity. I always say I don't care what your degree's in, but I want your brain to bring clarity to our discussions. And I tell you, clarity is just such a hard thing to bring, actually. Paddy Ashton, who was leader of the Liberal Democrats, said he'd sell his grandmother for some clarity. So I always think about that. And I've met people who bring clarity. I've met barristers who bring clarity to things. Very interesting. And I've met some senior politicians actually who bring clarity. A lot of politicians don't bring clarity, I should point out, but there are some that really bring some clarity. And I bet, I once when I was British Energy, I had we were looking for a chair of our trustees, our pension fund trustees, and I was proposed a former Conservative cabinet minister, and I looked like, oh, really? And he came along to see me, and we had one of the clearest discussions I've ever had with anybody, right? Because he'd thought about it, he understood the issues directly, he understood what the company was about, and it was another case where it's sort of revelation. You think you just got it. And I've also had discussions with Lord Panic. I'll mention a name, Lord Panic, who is a barrister and who does lots of very contentious cases. And I've been along to see Lord Panic about legal issues. I should point out he's very expensive, right? Not something you do for fun, right? You go along to see him, all of a sudden he speaks clarity to things. And I tell you, that is just, you sit there and you think, okay, I now understand. And that phenomenally important. On boards, you want people who can talk clarity and see things very clearly, all right? Because they use the phrase of the fog of war. There's also the fog of business as well, actually, is that you can get, overwhelmed by a wealth of issues around the business, around the market, around your activities, all of those things. And you want people who can see through that and just see clearly exactly what the issues are. And they're worth every single penny you pay them, I assure you.
Fantastic. And our final quickfire question is, what is your favourite Aston memory?
Can I bring it right up to date? I tell you, my favourite Aston memory was when I was awarded an honorary degree in 2016, right? And it came out of the blue. I was then executive chair of Punch Taverns. My PA got a letter, and she said, I've got a letter from Aston University. They want to award you an honorary degree. And I was absolutely flabbergasted because I thought, this is just never crossed my mind. And it was part of the first 50 years of Aston, recognising 50 graduates. And I thought it was a phenomenal sort of, compliment of some sort. The university had gone to the effort of thinking about me, looking at what I'd done, and thinking I was worthy of an honorary degree. And we had, and my wife, my two daughters and I had a fabulous day at Aston when we had the award. And I've never felt so important, right? I know, and I tell you, I've got some fantastic pictures from the day, and everything about it was really well organised. The whole function, the way that the Vice Chancellor before last was there, the Chancellor was there. We went along to the degrees ceremony. The phenomenal buzz you get from the undergraduates who are then graduating, all of that, and I felt it was some sort of coming full circle in some sort of way. And I felt it was great to be part of it. And my daughters and my wife, I think we were just slightly overwhelmed by it all, actually. So that is my favourite. It's not that old, 10 years old as a memory, but it came full circle. And you look at the pictures of us outside the university building at Aston, and you can see we were all really enjoying ourselves because it was one of the best days I've had, actually. It was just phenomenal stuff, actually. No, credit to Aston, a real credit to Aston to recognise. And not only recognise people, but also when you award them the degree, show your appreciation of that. They've done well. And I think what it did for me is it said that Aston matters. And one of the things I always do on all my biographical details, I always put down about the honorary degree, because I think it shows that this is a university that wants to show and represent people who've done, they think they've done well. And it shows that, and I want messages to other students, you can do the same.
Stephen, thank you ever so much for coming on the podcast, and also for being such a strong supporter and good friend to Aston in general. It's been absolutely wonderful talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.